You are listening to the Rising Pineapples Inspirational Talks, a video podcast series of interviews to empower women to reach their full potential. You share your questions with us and we'll bring amazing women who will answer by sharing their stories with you. Today I'll be speaking with Delphine Mousseau. Delphine will be sharing her experience on what drove her to start her career in consulting, then change to e-commerce back in 1999, and how knowing herself better helped her along the way. She will also talk about the difficulties to get to the executive level in corporate and how important it is to make decisions for yourself to continue growing. So today I'm interviewing Delphine, who is the founder of Rising Pineapples. I'm really excited to speak with you today, also because I would love to hear a little bit more about your career. So why don't we start with you introducing yourself, who you are, where did your career start, and what are you currently doing?
So I'm Delphine. As you can hear from my accent, I'm French. I've been living 8 years in Amsterdam and 10 years in Germany, so I feel like a European citizen. And I've been working 5 years in consulting and 20 years in e-commerce. Right now, I'm working as a digital e-commerce expert, and I'm helping CEOs and executive team to really understand the challenges of digital and implement successful strategies to bring digital in their business model. And I'm doing that through non-executive, due diligence, and coaching of CEOs.
Very cool. So going back to the beginning of your career, can you tell us a little bit about the main skills that you developed as a project leader at BCG and actually why you decided to join BCG?
Yeah, so joining BCG is kind of an interesting story. I think when you start your career, you don't really know what you want to do, and you tend to be very influenced by society. So I think one key influence for me was kind of inner passion was to discover the world. I had done a lot of backpacking and I really wanted to go and work abroad. I had a great experience in India, so I wanted to go to Asia. And I found a job in an import-export company in Vietnam. And the guy said, you know, I hope you like sports. It would be good if you would like tennis because the only activity is a tennis court in Hanoi. And I was just like, maybe I need a plan B. And this is where the social pressure comes in, or the social influence. I should say the business school I was in, it was kind of in fashion to do business consulting. So I thought, why not? And at that time, McKinsey had a bad reputation in the Paris office. People were considered arrogant. I don't like atmosphere where people are arrogant. So I thought, okay, let's go to number 2, BCG. So I interviewed, and they were really great because after 4 hours of interviews, you go home, and then a courtier came with a bottle of champagne and the contract. So I was just like, oh my God, what am I doing? So I called them and said, you know, I really have that wish to travel the world and work abroad. So I'm a bit confused. And they said, it's an open offer, you come whenever you want. So I went to do an internship for Alcatel in Asia for 4 months. And then I joined BCG in January 95. So it was really a nice adventure. And in the end, I really loved BCG because at that time, it was a small office. We had 70 consultants. I was the second woman in the office. And we were working on many different cases. So I think what I've learned the most is how to really look at how a business model is working, you know, deconstructing the value chain, understanding the environment and what is really valued by your supplier, your clients, and how, you know, like all of this is working, and with a very strong intellectual approach to it. So I remember sometimes, you know, on a Saturday evening, we would be like starting writing stuff on a board, and I had all those engineers super good in math and saying, oh, it looks like the theorem of blah, 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 mathematician. And it was just like, guys, it's 9 p.m. I'm gonna go, you can have fun. So there was this kind of intellectual challenge that I really liked very much. I think a lot of people also were there because they had a chance to talk with CEOs. So it kind of bursted their ego. So, you know, having this importance and relationship was also a driver. For me, I was not so much into that. And there were a lot of people who were there because it was really well paying. So, so for me, it was really the intellectual challenge that kept me for 5 years at BCG.
And what was the moment where you decided to leave BCG? So afterwards, you joined this online retailer as director of operations. So what inspired that move?
So actually, the move was also on social pressure. I met my life partner, and at some point he said, you're working 70 hours a week. So if you want this relationship to work, you will have to decide, you know, what job you take, because right now there is no space for me in this. And I decided to leave BCG. And luckily at that time, BCG was looking for a lot of seniors. So they offered me to work 50% of my time, paid 100%. So it was quite a good deal.
Wow.
And I started actively looking for operational jobs. I think one part of me also wanted to do something where I could leave a mark. And one of my last cases was for the Galeries Lafayette, which is owned by a family. And very terribly, the CEO died from a heart attack. And all our project went to the bin because another part of the family took over. And that was a moment where I thought, okay, I cannot do this anymore. I want to see the result of my work. But because I was young, female and well paid, I was not offered any kind of operational job. People offered me like a director of strategy. And I was just like, if it's doing the same with more constraint, that's not really interesting. And luckily, it was a moment where the internet bubble blown in France. And I thought, okay, that might be interesting. Worst case, I will be consulting background plus internet. That's a good resume. So I started talking around and seeing what was happening. And a friend from BCG was founding a startup with his wife. She was from L'Oréal. And he said, yeah, if you want to join, you're welcome. So I was kind of participating as a kind of co-founder and in a co-working space. We were not using those words because it was, dial-up internet. And this is how I ended up at Plantes et Jardins, selling some plants for the garden online. Way too early, but it was still a very interesting adventure.
Very cool. And can you tell us a little bit about how that differed from your experience in BCG in terms of skill set? Could you apply some of the learnings from BCG into this role as well?
Yeah. So what was interesting is that actually, maybe some people experience that when you change completely the type of job you're in, is that at BCG, I had usually one question for the whole week. And I could really like munch on the question. And when I was at Plantes et Jardins, my first assignment was to get suppliers because we were working as a marketplace, which was kind of innovative for that time. And so I was calling suppliers and trying to get appointments. And sometimes I would call 30 suppliers in an hour and a half. And then I would not remember who I'd called, who had said what. I was completely confused because my brain was really not working with the same level of attention and detail. So it was really, really challenging. So this I had really to adapt, but some elements around thinking how you construct or deconstruct the business was really, really helpful, and especially to pitch the project with partners was really, really helpful. And we had also to think, because this whole internet didn't exist, so we had to do a lot of concept. It was not like we could use MailChimp for sending newsletter. We had to invent what should a newsletter look like. How much do you want to put in there? And imagine what the customer journey would be. And I'm still using what we did at that time in many of my assignments now in e-commerce.
Wow. So you were in this company for 5 years, right?
Yeah.
What was the point for you? When did you decide to move on? What sparked that?
Yeah. So I was at Plantes et Jardins for a rather long time. I had 2 children already so I did maternity leave in those years. And at some point I had those 2 young children in a small, like playground in the middle of Paris, queuing to go to the slide. And we thought, okay, this is not working. So we need to go abroad. My partner at that time had been working abroad. So I felt like, maybe this is good for us to kind of reconvene with a kind of an expat life. And we said the first one who is finding a job will go. So he found a job in Amsterdam. And I said at that time, this is not bad enough that I can say no. And actually, I loved Amsterdam. So it was really like a career choice that got us out of Paris and that got me out of Plantes et Jardins. So I worked a bit at a distance. This is why there is kind of an overlap. But then I had to rethink my career.
Yeah. Did you immediately afterwards join Tommy Hilfiger, or did you take some time in between Plantes et Jardins and Tommy Hilfiger?
So I actually did some time off. And what was really interesting is that when I left, I did a proper time with a coach to really think about my career. And it was a full approach on personal and private life, also from a spiritual point of view. And I thought, I'm going to talk to that coach and everything's open because, I've been doing strategy consulting, I've been doing internet, so I can do marketing, I can do, communication, I can do finance, everything's possible. And then after a full day of work, we ended up saying, refrain from sending your resume. And that was really painful to me. But it's true that I was actually changing country. At the time, we didn't have Google. So you mean like no Google Translate, no Google Maps when you're arriving in a new country was really, really challenging. My kids were changing language. my ex-husband was changing job, changing company, like it was so much move and had been working hard. So she gave me a very, very good advice. She said, settle. She gave me two advices: settle and do everything as if you would stay for 20 years. And this is an advice I'm actually using right now in the COVID time. Do as if it would do last 20 years, because otherwise you never build anything. So don't do the turtle, like I'm waiting and trying to avoid what's happening. No, just take the space. Was a very good first advice. And the second really, really good advice, she said, try to keep your employability. So whatever you do for passion, make it a job, make it something that can last and can be shown. And as such, you will basically occupy your time by something you can use afterwards. So this is what I did. I did a bit of consulting, but I also created a small company selling seat covers for bikes, which is called bikecap.com. And I sold it to a friend, and she made it a really big business. So really interesting that when I'm traveling the world, I'm still seeing some bike caps, and I keep on asking, did you really invent bike cap? I'm just like, yes, I did. And I also wrote a book about the secret places in Amsterdam, because I love discovering the history around, like whatever is in your city, maybe a statue in the courtyard next to you. What's the story behind? And there is a very rich history in Amsterdam. And I've been really like looking at everything. And this book was sold 12,000 copies in 5 languages. So it's been really something. I've got my name on Amazon, and it's part of something that was my passion that I turned into a project. I mean, my worst paid project ever, but still something that I can claim somehow. So it took me a bit of time before I moved to another corporate assignment.
How did you decide actually to pick those projects? Was it just things that you were personally interested in, the bike cover and the book?
Yeah, it was really things that I loved doing, and that I thought, okay, how do I make this professionally? And I did a lot of other things. I did website because I wanted to learn more how to code in HTML. So instead of doing fake website, I asked people, do you want to have a website against, gifts? So I did a website for a craft jewelry shop in Paris. I did all sorts of things. And so just exploring what I wanted to do for myself that I found fun and entertaining, and making it to the level where it could be claimed as something that had some form of business approach.
Yeah. And when was the time that you actually started going back to a company environment then? Was this when you joined Tommy Hilfiger?
Yeah, so actually Tommy Hilfiger came a bit out of the blue. And I want to stress here that sometimes you need to grab whatever comes, and it might be at a heavy price. So I get a call from this headhunter that I had seen during my time leaving BCG. And she called me and said, I've got this job at Tommy Hilfiger to run e-commerce for Europe. Are you interested? And I'm just like, oh my God, that's really great. And I was pregnant for my daughter. I was heavily pregnant. And she was supposed to come to Amsterdam. And she said, I kind of remember you, but I'd like to have a little exchange so we can confirm that. And then our travel was delayed. And then she sent me a message and saying, okay, I'm coming on Monday. And I said, well, my due date is on Monday, so I'm not really sure it's going to work out. And then during the weekend, actually, I gave birth. So I sent her a message and say, I'm so sorry, but I just gave birth. And she said, don't worry, I know what it is. I'll come and we'll just have a quick talk. So actually, I did an interview. Wow. I had just given birth, like for the mother here, like, you don't really look good, everything is complicated, but still, I will come home in my home. And we had our first interview. And then I had my second interview with my future boss, who had no kids, so I didn't have that experience 3 weeks later. So needless to say, I was fitting in no clothing, and I was interviewing for a clothing company, which was very embarrassing. So I guess this boss was a female German, kind of, the whole way. So she couldn't really understand why I wanted to work with 3 kids. So it took her a bit of time. And actually, she hired me only 2 months later, waiting for the process. And also the CFO at that time of the company asked me this beautiful question. You're married and you've got 3 kids. Why do you want to work? And there was a moment where I thought, okay, am I getting out of the room, or really do I want that job? And I thought, okay, I want that job. Swallow and go for it. So I took the job, and it was really, really the right thing to do. But it was a stretch, definitely.
So it was a stretch in terms of, first of all, I think it's amazing that you had this female recruiter that didn't just say no and really pursued, especially as you were probably a very strong fit for the role, and you had a boss that was accepting of that as well. What was the element that was a stretch, and did you feel Did you just know that you wanted the job and you just went for it, or did you feel a bit torn about whether to take it? Or
No, I was really excited and I felt like the stars were aligning. But at the same time, you know, a few days after birth, you're really not at your best. So I felt very challenged. Like it felt like it was a huge step for me to take that role, and getting organized quickly in a country you don't know, finding babysitters, you know, like it was basically going back to a full-time role. My ex-husband was also working full-time in a heavy pressuring job. So it was basically changing the rhythm big time. So like it's, you know, it's like even if you're in a racing car, you know, changing speed means having this kind of moment of acceleration. And that's a challenge.
How did you pitch yourself for this role?
To be honest, I knew from the beginning that I was the right person. There was not so many people experienced with fashion. They wanted to have someone who was a foreigner. I was already there, so they didn't to pay me with an expat package. So I knew like stars are aligned. This is made for me. It's gonna happen. So I was, and honestly, I was not really on the look yet. So I was rather relaxed.
Mm-hmm. Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit more general, not about specific roles. But I wanted to ask, what was your goal that you wanted to achieve in your career? And did this goal change over time?
Yeah, I think for me, there is a big element in my life is having fun. You know, like I need to really enjoy what I'm doing, and, you know, having relationship where I'm laughing, and, you know, there is some, some kind of common adventure. And I need to have the intellectual challenge. And for me, it's really important that I'm starting new projects. You know, like there is a lot of newness in what I'm doing. I'm a very good beginner. I'm not necessarily enjoying the long run, and I'm definitely not necessarily enjoying the finishing. I prefer to celebrate along the way than, you know, waiting for the finish line. So it's very important for me to have this dynamic. And I think what I loved in consulting was the intellectual stretch and the fact that we were beginning new cases all the time. And to be honest, in strategy, most of the time, after 2 months, you barely know as much as the people who have been 20 years in the business. And then you need to stretch yourself to actually show them and use all that data that you accumulated to go the next step. So there is this really feeling of newness, new project, and deconstructing and, you know, activating intellectually. So this critical thinking is for me something that I realized very quickly that I was really enjoying very much.
Were you able to apply this critical thinking in your role at Zalando as a VP of markets?
Yeah, definitely. The issue for me at Zalando was more that I had a certain responsibility because the company was already very big, which I'd never really had before. Because, you know, when I was in strategy, usually 2 or 3 people on one case. So there's not so many people you can, you know, get on their toes. At Tommy Hilfiger, I was the only one in the company knowing anything about digital. I mean, it's starting being in marketing at some point, but at the beginning, I was really the only one understanding what Facebook was about, you know, and HTML and things like this. So I had the territory for me. And when I arrived at Zalando, I saw a lot of stuff. I couldn't really touch them. Or actually, I started being involved in many projects. And quickly I realized if I want to succeed, I have to narrow down and do only what I was supposed to be doing, which is localize and really get this customer proposition right in the different countries. And I think where I brought a lot of value is because I've got this inner curiosity. I was talking to a lot of people, and my role was also to make sure that we would align the different element of the cost line in the P&L. So I had a lot of influence in the other departments, but it was really hard for me. Like I had to kind of not be involved in too many projects. Yeah. And that's always a challenge for me in a context where I only have a certain part of the territory and not the whole topic.
Did you consider moving, or did you try to move into another role where you would have more oversight of more topics? Or do you think that's hard to do in a company like Zalando?
So after the 4 years at Zalando, I kind of knew my job in and out, and it was time for me to get another challenge because intellectually I was not stimulated enough. So I started talking about, you know, what would be the next move. There was a job up, but I was refused that job. And actually, very painfully, I was offered to take a smaller role because the fact is that because they didn't want to give me the bigger job, if they had put someone above me, then I would have been kind of annoying for that new person because I would have taken too much space. So, you know, thinking about the organization, they thought, if we put Delphine a bit smaller, then it would be easier for the SVP above. And I was really annoyed by that because the point was that the way it was presented to me is that I could spend more time with my kids. And honestly, I was so dedicated in my work. I realized this is really this gender bias around maternal role. Like if people have kids, if women have kids, because it's not something that necessarily touching men, then the manager think that they would prefer being home. And if they had just observed me 2 minutes, they would have known that no, why my place is with my kids in the evening and at the weekend, but my place is during the day at work. So I was very frustrated. So that was one element. So I knew in my department I had no chance to go up. So I had to find side moves. And I looked at different opportunity to do side moves. So strategy was definitely one because I could have more view. But you realize that actually in the strategy department, very often you're not able to implement. So you can have the thinking piece, but actually the power is happening in the functions. So I had to basically take a role in a function, which I discussed. I wanted to potentially do a side move in tech, but at that time there were many other reasons why tech was not moving. And we had start of conversation, and after 4 months, nothing was happening. So I said to the guy, I don't want to wait 2 years to change job. So if nothing is happening, I will leave. And I think they didn't really understand that I was really serious about it. So when I actually gave my resignation later, there was a bit of a shock, but it is what it is. Sometimes you just need to take your decision for yourself to continue growing.
I agree. What skills have been the most valuable for you over your career?
So I think there is some elements around knowing what you're made for. And I've discovered over time, and especially in the last 2 years when I've been reflecting a lot on where I'm really spot on, is I'm really good at having this bird's eye view on a business. And I think over the years, I've been able to develop that skill by applying it in a lot of different environments, because I went back to consulting after Tommy. So I did 4 big consulting assignments. So I've seen maybe 35 different companies from rather close. So I think you develop, it's like a knife you're sharpen. So I think, so for me, it works. Maybe for other person, it's not their talent, but I think I realized that my talent is really to have this bird's eye view. And then the most I sharpen it, the better it gets. I think what I've also been learning over time is managing executives. And I think it was something that I learned rather quickly because of consulting. What happens is that the higher you go in a company, the more complex the topics are, like the more shitty they are. If it's simple, it's dealt with by the juniors. If it starts being complicated, it dealt with the middle manager. When it's really a mess, then it comes to the executive teams. Reverse, the more junior you are, the more time you have to discuss for a topic, and the more executive, the shorter time. I've been really much, much better at pitching my ideas, at being very straight on and saying, this is a situation, this is what makes it more complex. This is option A, B, and C. If we do A, it's going to cost this, and this is going to be the drawback. This is the opportunity. This is the risk. Option B, option C. And, I had like a meeting this Friday where I was giving my feedback as a consultant on a very big company. And I really I nailed it, because I'm now able to be very strong on my opinion. So of course, it means some topics you shouldn't address, but then you need to say, okay, this is I see A and B, and not I don't really know, maybe this is the option, because executives don't have a lot of time. So I had an hour and a half to discuss the whole project in a company. And I think if you're working in a department, most of the time, on your weekly alignment with the big boss, it might be, at Zalando for me, it was waiting for the elevator on Monday evening after, the weekly alignment, that I had a chance to pitch one project to the CEO. Mm-hmm. And saying, I've got a problem here, help me, get someone to help me on that topic, get this budget freed, accelerate this, partner there. It was really, really small. So the time that I had to pitch my project. So I think definitely the skill set on how to communicate and articulate your needs has been something that has been very helpful throughout my career.
That's very good advice. Do you have any further advice on how someone could sharpen that skill?
When you want to learn a skill, there is an element around training. So you can find material. There is one big element, which is observation. So whatever skill you want to learn, you want to learn about public speaking, try to find out who in your company is good at public speaking and observe and take notes and saying, oh, they did this, they started addressing people. They did a cracker joke at the beginning. What did they do that worked? Or you find someone really good at animating a meeting with different people and finding a consensus. What did they do? What did they do at the beginning? What did they do at the end? When did they get people to work together or work separately? Observation is usually a very big driver, and we undervalue observation. So trying to reflect, taking time to reflect is usually very helpful.
I'm going to implement this advice. It's very good advice. I wanted to talk just lastly a little bit about these different roles that you've taken throughout your career, and you've been really accommodating for you and your partner both having careers. So you've kind of balanced these full-time jobs and the consulting. Could you give any advice to women on your experience with balancing the changes as you went through motherhood and had 4 children?
So I think there are two elements. At first, the balancing with your partner. I think it's very important to have an open conversation about, you know, both your roles and your ambition. It's painful to say, but you know, if you're really, really ambitious, marry down. This is the easiest way because you will have the first position. It's not socially in our patriarchal something that we're really comfortable with, but this is the easiest route. If you're marrying someone who's got the same ambition or even higher ambition, there will be some point where there will be some friction. So for us, definitely the friction was first going abroad. You know, like it's difficult to find 2 jobs abroad. And when you're moving a second time, especially in the middle of the Germany, it's when you're not speaking German, it's even more challenging to find 2 jobs. I think there is another step when one of the 2 is taking a top exec job, because usually top exec job means more money. So then the second salary in comparison is less important. So it's not going to change your lifestyle, but the fact that you're working is changing the lifestyle. So it tends to put more pressure on the second salary. And there is also the fact that in terms of time, you've got more constraint than the top exec. You know, if the budget is at this time, then and the other one has got a different kind of calendar, then when do you go on holiday? You know, like, so it's a lot of challenge. So I think it's really important to discuss what you want. The major lesson for me was that you don't need to have a linear career. I'm really amazed at the way I'm phrasing my career. People are always saying, oh, what a great career. And it's just like, it's full of holes, you know. But the fact that I use that advice, you know, keeping your employability, make my story somehow smooth, even though it was totally not smooth. It was accelerating, stopping, accelerating, changing, you know. There was some consistency in e-commerce, but there were still very different experiences. So it's really okay to take different routes and accept that at some point you need to make some trade-off. So both of the 2 person in a couple can have a career. Then on having kids, it's a challenge. Definitely, there is no good time to have a kid. So if you feel like this is important for you, and honestly, you can be very happy with no kids, you can be fruitful in many ways. So I'm not saying that this is the only way at all. But if you want to have kids, just go for it. Because if you start waiting for the moment where the budget are going to be over and then you give birth and then it's going to be exactly the time you're back, you know, forget about it. It's never going to work. And, you know, I've seen it recently, you know, this woman who got a kid and, you know, of course, during a maternity leave, the company potentially is going to go into an M&A process. It's super annoying, but it's like this. It's never going to be right in terms of timing, but just go for it. And then afterwards, I think it's very, very important to accept that you cannot do everything right. So in terms of career, you have to decide where you want to put your emphasis. So there might be some moments where you want to dedicate a bit more to your family and accept that maybe your performance review is not going to be that good. That's fine. You know, like you have your own agenda and you need to take your career in your own agenda. The third point is definitely delegate. You need to choose what you love doing for your family, not necessarily for your kids, but for your family and for your personal time. And what you don't like doing, delegate it. And it may vary over time. You know, bathing a very small baby is great. Bathing a 4-year-old is a pain with water everywhere around the bath. I didn't like it, so delegate it. You know, maybe you love cooking. I mean, honestly, I discovered by delegating cooking that I'm a terrible cook and I don't really love cooking. So I like doing once in a while some stuff for my kids, and they're usually very appreciative because it's a few times a month. But it was much, much better when I came back from Zalando and I had a beautiful dinner on my table and I could enjoy the evening with my kids without fussing around the food. So choose what you like and what you want to delegate. That will help a lot.
Delegating to your husband or delegating to an external?
So you can delegate to your husband, you know, like both of you needs to look at what they like. So if your husband loves to cook, delegate to your husband. If you don't, your husband and you don't like folding the laundry, delegate to someone who loves folding the laundry. I mean, I'm partnering with my cleaning lady for 7 years in Berlin, and she loves ironing. She loves making the place really beautiful. And you could feel she's doing it with passion. And I'm very happy that I'm giving someone a job, and I'm very comfortable delegating those tasks. And I don't think they're mundane tasks. It's just like everyone's got different passion. I never loved really piling cubes, and I paid someone to do it with my kids. and I'm doing other stuff with my kids. I'm not considering myself a bad mother for that. I think I would be a terrible mother if I would pile cubes, not liking it, and showing my kids I didn't like doing it with them. I think it's much better that I delegate those tasks. And actually, they kind of agree. When I'm home too long, they're just like, you're a pain.
I love the advice of not trying to fit into everything and actually just, like you would do in a job, right? Focusing on your strengths is also as a mother.
Yes, you need to focus everywhere on your strengths. I don't like people who are trying to cover their weakness, because where you fit, and I've been learning that over time, right now, really, I discovered that this approach and strategy is where I'm much better than other people. And I can do other things reasonably well, but I'm not going to stand out. And I'd rather work in areas where I'm really standing out, where my expertise built over years is standing out, because this is where I'm going to be, of course, earning more money because I'm more valuable, but also I'm going to have more pleasure because it's going to come so easy to me. If you're a tall guy, it's much easier to play basketball. But if you're small and short, you're going to have a pain doing it. So, I mean, you can try, you can fight, but why making the life so difficult for yourself?
How did you identify your main strengths? So throughout these roles, how did you get to this point in your career now where you know exactly what your strength is and you play on that strength?
So I think there is two ways of knowing your strengths. There is the first way is try and error. So you try and see what it is. And there is another way is really getting feedback. And it's very difficult to know what you're good at because it comes easy to you. So you think it's coming easy for everyone. Mm. So you really need to have this external eye and asking people, what are you good at? I'm doing that exercise. Actually, I've been doing a training for young people to find their first job. And I did it with a class. So I usually pick people who are sitting next to each other and asking, turn to your neighbor, I'm going to pick this guy, and ask all the boyfriend and girlfriend around, what is this guy good at? And I start writing on the board, really great at math, really amazing at this. And you see like, really? Like, it's difficult to really accept how good you are and how unique you are. And I think it's not a question of arrogance. It's a question of really seeing the inner beauty of how you've been built. I truly believe people are unique and wonderful. And if you don't know how wonderful you are in certain aspect of your person, it's because you've not searched enough, search further. Maybe what you're good at is not what the world considers is great, but, in the end, who cares? What is important is that you're really doing what you're made for, and you're going to be successful if you're really, really focused. I think it's very important to think that 90% of the people will consider your skill set not appropriate for the project they have. But the 10% who's going to find it appropriate, they're going to think you're really rocking it. Whether a photographer doing portraits, or you're a cleaner, or you're a cook, or you're doing mathematics at a high level, it doesn't really matter. What counts is that you're really fitting in your space. And I think in your career, it's very important to feel, if I'm making that move, am I working on my strengths, or am I stretching myself to learn more? Sometimes it might be valuable. If you want to be a CEO, it might be important to try sales and marketing and kind of have an understanding of many things, but don't stay too long because it's going to be a pain.
On that very powerful note, I want to thank you very much for your time, and really looking forward to sharing this talk with our community, Rising Pineapples.
Thank you so much, Danielle.
Thank you for listening to our video series. We hope this story will inspire you to take action and reveal your unique potential. Make sure to follow Rising Pineapples on our social media. If you enjoy the talk, we'd love for you to share it with another woman who it might inspire.